Welcome to Psyche Magic, a podcast about self-discovery and the subconscious, where we explore the symbolic language of dreams, tarot, and archetypes. I'm your host, Jordan Hale. I'm a psychotherapist based in Nashville, Tennessee. Each episode, I'll hold a casual conversation with various artists and healers about their shadow work practices. We pull tarot cards, unpack a significant dream or dream theme, and discuss their personal healing arts practices. So please grab a cup of something delicious and stay a while. While aspects of this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is never meant to take the place of therapy. Welcome back to Psyche Magic. We are rolling along through season 3, and I'm already having so much fun. This season, I'm really focusing on a bit more free-form creativity, I would say, in every aspect of this project. So, in the spirit of that, I am practicing doing an intro where I am speaking freely instead of pre-writing everything that I want to say. So, we'll see how this goes. I am really feeling the seasonal shift. It feels like the timing is really helpful. Obviously, here in the northern hemisphere, we have just shifted from summer into autumn with the autumn equinox. Autumn is my time. It's when I come alive and feel most like myself. So I'm really feeling hopeful about stepping into this new season. Many of you know I'm in a grief process currently. My grief process is unfolding. This is something that I'm going to be carrying with me for a very long time. And my guest today is a perfect guest for this subject. So I'll talk more about Elena in a little bit, but I just wanted to say that, again, grateful for just the sort of synchronicity and timing of getting to have a guest who is deeply steeped and well-versed in the world of grief and grief processing. So this interview is and was healing to me, and I hope that it will be healing to you as well. Another thing I want to mention and shout out is that our new Saturday Salon event series is really feeding my soul right now. So this is our new weekly get together on Zoom every Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Central Time. We sit down, just a small group of us, and I lead a ritual where I essentially call a circle. Like I set this kind of energetic space with this intention to create, to sort of protect this time and make it a fertile ground for creativity. And so far, it has just felt so nourishing and lovely. We have had gardening, we've had writing, we've had visual art making, we've had pottery, we've had tarot. Everyone can choose their own adventure during this time. So there's not a lot of forced interaction. I just call the circle and then set you free to go create for an hour, myself included. And then we come back and we just talk a little bit, if you want, about how it went. And I'm living for it. So I'm going to keep this going. I hope that you'll join us. All the information is on our event page on our website, psychemagicpodcast.com. So in the spirit of grief processing and this sort of episode topic, I wanted to touch on something really fascinating that I recently discovered here in East Nashville. So there's a wonderful human here in East Nashville named Allison Stillwell Young. She recently posted about this in the East Nashville Facebook community, which is where I heard about this. But she is a student of thanatology, which that's a new term for me. I had never heard this term before. The study of death, dying, and bereavement. Yes, please. And she has installed something called a wind telephone on her property here in East Nashville. So she teaches us that a wind telephone is a disconnected phone that grievers use to hold one-sided conversations with people they've lost to death or for any other reason. It's a method of continuing bonds wherein people continue healthy relationships with the dead rather than breaking the bonds that they had in life. Using the phone rather than having one-sided conversations at home is part of the material culture of death because of holding on to the person's phone number or alternatively dialing their name, and the tactile nature of holding the phone as a form of ritual. You know, we're big on ritual here at Psyche Magic. And as someone who's actively grieving, I will say that even small, tangible rituals, something like burying a piece of paper that, you know, sort of names or represents something that you're wanting to let go of, wanting to release. That's part of a ritual that I did to honor my current loss. I also bought a house plant to commemorate this little seed that was growing and that did not make it. And that's another just really sort of joyful expression of that sort of life, death, life cycle that just continues and is a natural part of life, and just a really beautiful reminder of that to me. This wind telephone idea is just fantastic to me. I love this concept, and I'm looking forward to visiting this site myself, planning to reach out to Allison as well to see if she's interested in being on the show. So we'll see about that. But I want to read a little bit more about the history of this idea of the wind telephone, because I think this is really cool. So this Allison has this on her website, switchboard.support, where she has all kinds of information about grief and bereavement and wind telephones specifically. So in December 2010, so this is a relatively new invention, a Japanese garden designer named Sasaki Itaru, family first name, put an old telephone booth in his garden in Otsuchi, Japan. He bought them from a pachinko parlor that was closing. Inside, he placed a rotary phone. He wanted to use it to talk to his favorite cousin who had died of stomach cancer earlier in the year. This was called a wind telephone. He stated that when he created it, he knew his words could not be carried on a phone line to his cousin, so he decided to have them carried on the wind instead. 3 months later, the Great East Japan earthquake and the tsunami after it hit Otsuchi, and 10% of the citizens were either killed or considered missing. This was one of the most affected towns in Japan. Soon after, Sasaki noticed people coming to use his phone and officially opened it to the public. It has become a place of pilgrimage with over 25,000 people visiting the original booth since it opened. The original wooden phone booth has since been replaced with a hardier aluminum one because of so many visitors and the fact that it's on a hill overlooking the ocean. The idea has spread across the globe, and there are now wind telephones in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. You can also find more information about wind telephones at mywindphone.com. So I will leave you in this intro for now with a poem that's been really healing to me. This is by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's very simple. It's called Please Call Me by My True Names. Please call me by my true names so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so that I can see my joy and pain are one. I love this poem and this spirit, and it really ties nicely into introducing my guest for today, Elena Box. Elena introduces herself as both a shamanic death doula. Don't worry, we'll get all into unpacking what exactly a shamanic death doula does. But she also introduces herself as a comedienne. And the reason that she does this is that she is deeply committed to this idea of both death and joy and laughter needing to coexist. That this is a sign that we are grieving healthily and wholly and fully when we can hold these experiences simultaneously. And I will say from my own experience, this is essential. So Elena and I discuss dismantling fear around the tarot during our tarot pull. We discuss visitation dreams from loved ones in spirit, strategies for managing grief, protecting and grounding your energy, especially when spending time in liminal spaces like hospitals, and so much more. We laugh, we cry, we get silly, and we feel it all. I hope this conversation is helpful and healing to you as it was to me. Just a quick heads up, we did have a little bit of a technical issue towards the end of the interview. My recording, for some reason, just stopped. So Elena was unknowingly having a wind telephone one-sided conversation for a little bit at the end. So we cleaned it up and trimmed it as best we could so that it flows. But we were able to catch most of this juicy interview. So just a heads up there. All right, without further ado, onward to my interview with Elena Box. All right, Elena Box, welcome to Psyche Magic. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yay! Elena, you do so many wonderful sort of depth-oriented things in your work. I would love it if you could just introduce yourself for the listeners and just tell them who you are and what you do.
Hello, dear listener. My name is Elena Box, and I am a shamanic death doula and comedienne because I think it's very important in the work of living and dying to maintain a sense of humor. So I weave a lot of my work with humor. I'm also a yoga teacher, and right now I am living on Long Island in New York, just to give you some context of where I am.
I love knowing where people are in space. Like, that is actually very helpful to me. So, yay. Also, I'm obsessed with New York, so we'll talk about that more too. I just love it. I'm so glad that you call out that you're a comedian and that infusing everything that you do with humor is such an important part of sort of your mission. And that has absolutely been part of what has drawn me into your work and your spaces, is just that balance of like the silliness and the playfulness with the shadow and the depth and the death and the intensity. Like, it has to all be there for integration. So yes, we love that.
It's all there. Even hearing you say that like makes me cry, which is so funny because you're like, I love that you bring humor into it. And to me, it's so huge. It's such a huge part of why I do what I do, because I find so many people when they're navigating grief or death or even just moving through huge life challenges and shifts, there's so much seriousness to this. And especially when it comes to spiritual work. And I find, there's this quote I always love to say, and I don't know who said it, but it's sort of this idea, because I'm a shamanic practitioner, and they say something like the quality of you have a good shaman by the sound of their laugh. And I think that's so huge. It's so important because we need to, I guess, learn how to take life less seriously and hold the gravity of it, of course, but with a sense of levity, with a sense of lightness in the palm, so we can hold the things that are important to us, and anything else that we're ready to let go of can sort of just slip through the fingers.
Yes.
And what a cosmic giggle all along. That's my perspective.
Cosmic giggle.
Yeah. We need the cosmic giggle. Yeah.
That's just like so cute. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm already getting like too excited. Okay, I need to calm down, just breathe, Jordan. We have an hour. We have plenty of time to talk. It's going to be okay. But just hearing you speak about that, Elena, I can tell that this is so authentic to you. Like, this has been a part of your own wisdom and learning through your own journeys, your own grief journeys, healing processes. Like, I can feel how much you've experienced it and how much you mean it. There's just so much wisdom there. So it's beautiful. Thank you. I'm just very excited right now.
Thank you. Thank you for having me in this way. It feels really good to be seen.
It does feel good to be seen, doesn't it? Oh, yes. Yay. Good. I'm glad you feel seen. Okay. So let's move into our tarot, because I'm getting into the love fest portion of the show, and usually that comes later, so let's take it slow. Okay, we're going to pull a card. Now, first of all, I'm just curious, Elena, is tarot a part of sort of your practices or something that you engage with? I'm just curious.
It's something I definitely engage with. I have a lot of really beautiful spiritual friends who carry the most wonderful, like
Cool.
seasoned tarot decks. And so, yeah, it's like they pull it out of the box and it has this smell to it and this
Yes.
personality. And I think there's
Patina.
yeah, yeah, it's been well loved. And so
Yes.
I often, when I'm seeking guidance, I'll go to one of these friends and they'll do a reading for me. But for me personally, it's kind of funny. I've always sort of had tarot decks around me. I have a lot of like sort of oracle card decks, that kind of that nature.
Cool.
And for myself, I guess I just have never felt super pulled to working intimately with the cards, although I have a huge amount of
Yeah.
reverence and respect for them, and maybe that's sort of why. So I'm kind of like, all right, let me leave this to the experts, so to
Yeah.
speak. And um, so
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan. Big fan.
Well, because it's such a, I mean, it's like, I always say that learning tarot is like learning a language, right? And so if you're someone who is learning many other languages, like there's not necessarily room to learn like every language, right? Like I have to like pick and choose.
Pick and choose, pick your tools. And that's the thing too, is like in the work that I do, I have my specific sort of magical tools. And for me, I just, anytime I've received a reading, it's funny because there's certain cards that I really work with, sort of like
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
archetypically, the archetype of them. And I kind of want to tell you what they are, but I'm also curious to see if any of them show up because they often do. But yeah, so let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, I love tarot. So, tarot is a very big part of my practice. And I would even say that it's actually part of the kind of gateway or keyhole that led me into like my own spiritual awakening and spiritual practices was just learning to work with tarot and being able to feel seen, like being able to have those synchronicities of like, wow, this thing that I'm experiencing is being reflected to me tangibly. Like I feel connected. So, yeah, I am a big tarot person. I use tarot personally. I use it professionally with clients as a therapist, and I use it on the show. So let's just see what
Yeah,
comes
let's
up.
do it. Oh, excited. So juicy.
So
Yeah.
juicy. Okay, I'm shuffling. I'm shuffling. I am feeling like we've got a card that is popping out. Okay. Ooh, okay. So we got the Hanged Man.
Hell yeah. Fuck yeah. So I don't know more allowed to curse, but yes.
You are allowed to
yes.
curse. Be yourself.
right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now quickly before we get into it, I'll just describe it because I feel like for a lot of listeners, they might not know what it looks like. So the Hanged Man is a really visually interesting card. So there is this T-shaped sort of branch structure. And there's a figure, I mean, presumably a man because it's called a hangman, hanging upside down. He's got his legs in this sort of almost like tree pose, like kind of figure four shape. He's hanging upside down. He's got his arms bound behind his back. He's got this very cute little like blue tunic, cute little red tights. And he also has the sort of aura or halo around his head where this is kind of yellow glowing light. So he's hanging upside down, but he's got this like beautiful kind of resonance going on. So, okay, talk to me about the Hanged Man. Is this one of your cards? Tell us about it, please.
What comes to mind immediately, and I was going to say this before, it's kind of funny because I think a lot of times, at least in my experience, people are very afraid of tarot because of cards like this, like the Death card or the Tower card or
Yes.
the Hanged Man, all of this, because they're like, oh no, like, am I going to die? Is somebody I know going to die? Like, what's happening, right?
Yes.
But for me, I see this really as an opportunity because my whole work, my whole life is about really acknowledging these places in our lives that are encouraging us to transform, which may mean having parts of ourself die off.
Let's embrace it.
So when these types of cards come up, I'm like, hell yeah, all right, let's go. Let's like, it's sort of
Absolutely.
that kind of Kali Ma energy of like, burn it to the ground, what's next? And embrace it. And I don't have a deep relationship with this specific card, so I'm really excited and curious to hear what you have to say about it.
First of all, I love that you mentioned and called out that there's this, like, oftentimes this fear around tarot in some ways from some of its particular sort of historical or cultural connotations as like fortune telling, right? Whereas on this show, it's all about symbol, it's all about metaphor, right? So when you look at the Hanged Man and you see it through your particular lens, you see this figure that is maybe symbolizing some type of metaphorical death, right? Or transformation, and that can be a really empowering thing, not necessarily a scary thing, and a natural thing. So I love that connection. And for me, the Hanged Man being a major arcana card just means that we are dealing with the major sort of secrets and treasures of life. Like, this is a lesson, the lesson of the Hanged Man, that would likely unfold throughout someone's entire lifetime. It's not a card that's meant to be conceptualized or understood within one specific way, like its meaning will unfold. So for me, I would say that the Hanged Man is a card that is all about a shift in perspective at any point in time. So he is bound, like he doesn't have control. So it's also a card that's about surrender. Like, even when I am in a situation that's calling me to surrender to the unknown, to a different way of being or seeing the world, he still has that halo. He is still divinely guided and held. Yeah, right? Okay, yeah.
It's like, I'm hanged, but like, I'm okay with it. Like, I look good. I'm glowing.
Like, maybe it's part of the journey. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you were saying, it's just so often we automatically approach any type of shift in perspective or upheaval with fear. And I mean, even as you talk about in your book, like even like a victim mindset, like, oh, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? And I love how you've presented something that's been really helpful to me in my own sort of grief processes, which is like, why not me? Like, what if this is just part of being a human, right?
So glad I have full body chills hearing you.
Okay, that's a good sign. That's a good sign.
Such a big lesson. It's such a big lesson. It's like, why not me? Like, what made me so special that I'm somehow immune to having these huge life experiences of grief and loss and heartbreak? Like, what makes me so spectacular that means that I just get to coast through life? Because to me, these experiences of grief, of loss, of all of the most heartbreaking things that literally bring us to our knees, I call them a special gift. It's a strange, special gift that you would perhaps never wish upon anybody else. But as you begin to unpack it and open it up for yourself, you begin to notice these strange little gifts. Oh, it's just not always easy because I'm not trying to sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say like, oh, I can't stand when people say like, oh, God only gives you what you can handle, or everything happens for a reason. And no, I'm not trying to like spiritually bypass it, because of course, like, loss is a fuck up.
I'm glad you used that term, yes. Not to be mistaken with spiritual bypassing.
It's like, yes, it's the shittiest thing ever. And it's not to diminish the hurt or diminish the pain, but it's like, where can I move through this pain and transform and really alchemize this experience to find the magic and find those little specks of gold? And they might be little glimmers to begin with. And as you continue to unpack it, my experience has been that it continues to grow and build, so that you really begin to build. Almost it reminds me of his little halo, the hangman. He's like,
the way you're sort of holding your hands even is that becomes like a new awareness that I've stepped into, like a depth that I've moved into, a connection I've moved into. Perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps it's an opportunity. It's an invitation to, I think, marinate yourself a little bit more as a human, as a soul, because in the words of one of the great teachers in sort of the death trade, Stephen Jenkinson, you want to learn and become an elder. You're basically like an elder in training. So how can we really enrich ourselves and enrich our life experiences so that we can be really full embodied elders to lead future generations, the hope is, and become a well ancestor. So on the other side, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren are like, oh yeah, like my grandma, da-da-da, like, let's call her in. She was a badass, like she was a witch. Let's call her in.
Yes. Well, I love that you're tying it into this idea of the different archetypal phases of human life and the kind of crone or like elder phase, and how, yeah, the natural process is that death becomes more and more a part of your life. The older you get, it becomes something that you are more and more familiar with. Yeah, I will say that I am in a grief process right now. So I am actually processing the loss of a pregnancy. And this is something that I've talked about on the show and that I will continue to talk about because people don't talk about it. It gets really pushed into the shadow, right? Like the things that we like don't want to look at. So in that grief process, I am already feeling, okay, there's transformation here for me. Like there is sadness and anger and all of the words of the phases of grief, right? And there's transformation, there's wisdom, there's growth, and I can feel it. So like we were saying at the beginning about holding it all together, like the joy and the laughter and the pain, I'm trying to hold all the things. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there. Just share that a little bit.
I know how deep a wound that is, having experienced it myself in my own journey.
Really?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to take a moment to pause and just honor your experience and honor your own unborn child. And I know how deep of a process that is. So again, it's like, let's not sugarcoat it. This is one of the things nobody wants to talk about it, but it is a death. I did an interview on my podcast where we were talking about honoring our unborn children. And
it is a fantastic episode.
It's a fantastic episode. But we birthed death, which is this sort of really wild, sort of like the snake eating its own tail kind of experience.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's deep, and it's something that I think a lot of women feel perhaps shame in speaking of, but it's such a universal experience, and that's why I honor your bravery in speaking it, because the more we speak it and the more we articulate our experience, the more we give other women the permission to do the same.
Yes, Elena, and the same goes to you. Like, thank you for sharing and witnessing that this is something that many people go through. And that has been the most helpful thing to me. It helps me get out of the why me space, right? Because I get to connect with other women who understand, and it helps me feel like, okay, so then why not me? Like maybe this is a part of the process for a lot of people. But again, the silence doesn't help. Like the lack of information doesn't help. And this is true of death awareness in general, right? We're often so unprepared to move through this process because nobody's talking about it. Nobody's educating us about it.
There's no roadmap. And something you said earlier brought to mind, the fact that the idea is as we get older, we become more familiar with death.
Yeah.
Although what I've found is in my own experience, when I was going through this deep process of losing my father, turned to the elders around me, and I was really looking to them to be like, hey, what's the roadmap here, guys? Like, what's the game plan,
Somebody,
right? And
please.
everybody was like, I don't know. It's just really sad. And I was like, well, that's not good enough for me. Like,
that's not going to cut it.
So that's why I think these conversations are really important, and to use our voices to amplify experience in all forms of death. That when we become elders, we can look at our children and our women, our young women who are going through this similar experience, to say, hey, my love, like, let me hold your hand. I got you. And
I'm not going to turn away from this. Like, I will be here.
Yeah. Like, let me get in there with my fingers, like into the soil, like into the blood. Really. That's the kind of bridge that I'm hoping to build, is sort of like this sisterhood of women gathered around the earth who were like, I got you, sister.
Yes, please. Like, hell yeah. So I was just going to say that, while we're on this subject of not turning away, of educating ourselves, empowering ourselves to speak about these experiences candidly, right? Another thing that I appreciate about your work, and in this case, your book specifically, is that there's this emphasis even just on the practicality of understanding like what a death rattle sounds like, and like educating myself on like, how do I be prepared when I experience this, right? Like, I know this is coming. This is something I want to understand. Part of the traumatic nature, I think, of a lot of loss and grief processes is just no information. Like, like you said, no roadmap, nothing. So even just those very practical things, what can I learn? What can I learn about the just very fundamentals of what this process is and how it looks? It's not to be underestimated. Like it's so important. So yeah.
And I think especially when it comes to death and dying, often it is done in a very medicalized setting. And so certainly if you have a good hospice team, they will sort of give you information on what to expect. Although my experience was I think that there's a bit of restriction in what they can do and what they can say, perhaps even just
right. That's true. That's a good point, actually. Yeah. Yes.
So they don't want to say like, listen, this may happen or da 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 da, because legally they don't want you to be expecting something and then something else happens. I mean, it gets very, very tangly and weedy, especially when you're in this sort of the medical system. But this is where we get our death doulas. Call in your death midwife, call your local death midwife, because 100. We can help guide you through this process of what to expect, how to handle it, how to navigate it, because that's the thing. That's why I wrote the book, because, and listen, it's not an exhaustive guide. I did my best. And even now I look back and I'm like, oh, I really should have added that thing in there, but it's something to start with. And so I'm happy to hear that it's given you some information. And
absolutely. It came to me at the perfect time. Like, I need this book right now. Yeah. Yes. Well, okay. And so I want to transition into talking about the dream that you presented. And I want to preface that by saying that you've already touched on the loss of your dad. I hold space for that loss. Like, I cannot imagine what that loss is like because I haven't lost a parent. But I commend you, and I'm so just in awe of the way that you share and how open you are. So thank you. And I just feel that. So that is a part of the dream that you presented, right? So yeah, I would love it when you're ready, if you could just share a little bit with the listeners about this dream, and then we'll kind of unpack it, explore it.
That's juicy. What an exciting conversation to have. And thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you for your honoring of my dad. And even just hearing that from you, I really celebrate the experience. And I really hope our listeners not like, that's bullshit. Like, I don't celebrate like that. It's like, it's so hard. I celebrate the experience of the loss of my father because it gave me so much. And even in this dream, and even in after his passing, like, I've received so much from him. So for me, again, like, yeah, all right.
Okay, great.
Like, thank you for this experience. So I'll get into the dream. So, it was so funny thinking about what dream I was going to share. And then this one came to me because it was one of these dreams that was so real that it wasn't even a dream.
Hyper real. Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of like, okay, so that was actually a visitation. Like, I haven't really done too much with astral travel too much, just because sometimes I think, well, where do I even feel like going? Like,
it's kind of overwhelming.
I'm like, there's so many places to go, but like, I've doubted a little bit. So I would say it's maybe akin to that. I think in other dreams, sometimes things like you were mentioning in the prompts, like how is this a symbol of something else, which I am very interested in. And definitely, like, I work with a Jungian analyst who I'll be like, all right, Deborah, like, let's talk about my dreams. And she'll be like, well, every part of the dream is
it's a lens.
And I'm like,
right? It's one lens.
Like, that's good, Deborah. Although I think in this dream, it was, for me, my experience of it was that it was a real visitation with my father. So I feel like I want to give a preface to the dream just to sort of lay the land for how this sort of really hit home for me when it occurred. So right after my father passed, he passed from brain cancer. He was on that journey. They gave him 3 months, and he took it for a 3.5-year wild ride. And the morning he passed, he was strong. He was a Texan man. So people say that you...
Oh my God, I'm from Texas, dude.
Yes.
It's just such a specific, like, they're not playing around.
No.
They're so stubborn.
No, I mean, he'd go in for his cancer treatments and we'd be like, Dad, like, are you okay? He was a big football player growing up in Texas. He was like, Lena, if I can do 2-a-days in 110-degree heat, I can get through anything. And I was like, all right, sure enough, like, you got this. And they say that you die like you live. And so he died in such a freaking like badass, like heroic, beautiful, like legendary way. And for that, Stephen Jenkinson, I'm gonna talk him up again, but he speaks about how you die is like you're really laying this sort of feast, this table of this feast. I almost envision like a cornucopia from which your relatives who witness you through that process will continue to retain or receive sustenance from. He really laid such a beautiful table with his dying. Like such a freaking legend. So the morning after he passed, it's such an interesting thing after somebody passes because you're kind of like, well, what now? Especially if they've been actively dying for a while. There's there's anticipatory grief. There's a lot of like, well, when's it going to happen? And is it going to happen? And happens. And you're just sort of kind of like, what now? Okay. And there's this pause, and it's such a delicious pause that for me, I chose to go over to our neighbor's house. I was staying there some of the time while my father was in hospice just because there wasn't enough room in the house. And so I was in this bedroom of hers, and I was on FaceTime with a friend of mine who's in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and she's like at this busy coffee shop. And I'm like trying to relay this beautiful story of how my father passed. And she's like, one moment, Elena, I'm just ordering a coffee. I'm like, girl. But it's fine. I was like, all right, it's okay. Like, this is the moment, right? And as I'm trying to relay this like very tender, beautiful story to her, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this enormous wave of golden light enveloped the entire room. I mean, it was palpable. I'm getting chills just speaking about it, full body chills, because it felt as if this beautiful, like warm, honey-like, loving energy, just pure love, the most powerful transmission of love I've ever received in my life. I had to say to her, I was like, Mia, hold on a second. Like something's happening here. And she sort of stops everything and she looks and she's like, I can see it. Like, she's like, I can feel it. I can see that something's happening. And I was like, okay, just like, give me a moment. And I just let myself be bathed in this most heavenly, really is the word, light and love that I've ever felt in my life. And to me, that was a signal from my father that he had, so to speak, made it to the other side. It was this like confirmation from him because during his dying process, I was very much in it from the spiritual sense with him. And he'd be like, during his active dying phase, he was very much in and out. Plus the brain tumor made him kind of like loopity. So he was like, Elena, where am I going? And I was like, well, like you're going to be dying soon. And he's like, wow, all right. He's like, and I was like, but don't worry, I'll be able to talk to you when you're on the other side. Like, we're going to be chatting all the time. He was like, oh, really? I was like, yeah. And so it was really this beautiful confirmation to receive this, like, just shining waterfall of golden light from him.
The only experience that I have had that feels similar, I have described as a weighted blanket of love, pure love. Like, it's incredible. And to me, it represents I guess what I would call, and you help me with your take, but I would call it like the purity of consciousness and connection and just the way that we are all connected through this sort of weighted blanket, golden light of love. It's amazing. Weighted blanket, golden light of love.
Yeah. Weighted blanket, golden light of love. Yes. Cool. Yes. It reminds me so much of honey. And I'm listening to this book right now called A Song of Increase. And they talk about how bees are literally keeping all of life on Earth going. They're the pollinators, right? And great book, but they talk about how sort of like their resonance, their frequency, because it's this woman who channels bees. Very cool. Okay. Yeah. Song of Increase. I can't remember the author, but they talk about how like their frequency is like all of them together in this unity consciousness, and how they're able to sort of communicate with one another. And it's this unity consciousness. Oh, yes. Like the hive mind, I've heard. Yeah. It's so cool. And then add in like honey, which is just this beautiful elixir of life, so life-giving. Like I would say it's that love. It's
yes,
like
please.
golden, like a weighted
Yes, please.
blanket of honey. Then you could go into, I mean, there's so much mythology or mythology around honey and milk, but that's a whole other story another time.
Yeah. I know, right? I know.
So many areas
I know.
we can go into, but should I get to the dream? Should I get to the juice?
Yeah. Okay. So that precursor, that was just so beautiful. And that makes so much sense that it's part of this journey that you're describing, right? There's that confirmation of like, I'm okay. Like I made this transition and it's all right. In fact, it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. In fact, I'm united with bliss consciousness, love, just love on the other side. So yes, thank you. I had to give that little story because I think it gives a wider context for the actual dream. And so the dream itself is actually quite simple, and yet it was very profound for me. And so this was, I would say, in the couple of weeks after his passing, where I was, again, sort of in this in-between state. I had chosen to go traveling. I went about a month after he died. I went and booked a one-way ticket to Australia. So I was sort of in this like in-between state. And I believe it was sort of in between his passing and then heading to Australia. And really the dream is quite simple. He came to me in my dream and he took me to really sort of like the outskirts of the Milky Way, if you could say. So almost as if we were looking down on Earth. And he showed me like his whole sort of like celestial den that he had. Like he had what he called like his man cave where he'd keep all his guitars. It's almost like his man cave among the stars. And he was like, welcome to my new spot, Lena. Like, this is it. I can see everything from here. And I was like, this is pretty sweet, Dad. And he was like, sure it is.
Like, you did good.
I was like, good job. And it was just this beautiful moment that I shared with him where I got to see his new spot, his new space, his new place where he resides. And I'll leave it at that for now and I'll open it up to where you want to take it.
Yeah, exactly. That there was, this quality of the dream that feels different than a typical dream, right? Which is this sort of hyper reality. And part of what I've come to understand because you use the term astral, right? Like sort of astral travel, this ability that our loved ones are able to sort of shepherd us into of exploring the cosmos via our dreams, via our astral body. And so your dad, being the badass that he is, was like, come on, I'm going to take you there. I'm going to show you. It's pretty sweet. And so, yeah, the Milky Way specifically, I mean, like just the most incredible and profound kind of view of space that like we lowly humans get to have if we're lucky, right? Like if we're in the right location that isn't totally light polluted. So it was familiar to you, right? Like it wasn't like some crazy, unknown, unforeseen place that might have been a little intense or scary. It was like, oh, I know what this is. This is amazing.
Yeah. Like I was like, oh yeah, I know this spot.
This is sick.
I've seen it. I've seen this. But yeah, I did want to mention also, so the month after when I went out to Australia, I had the privilege of going into a week-long retreat with two friends of mine. And so we're literally out in the bush in Australia and sort of miles out from any big city. And we're out in this open field at night and we just look up and you can see the Milky Way. And it was again this moment of like, yep, like confirmation, like, yep. You're exactly in the right place and all is well and with me.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Do you need even more Psyche magic in your life? If so, you are cordially invited to join us on Patreon. There, we release 2 bonus minisodes every month with guided exercises to help you strengthen your shadow work practices and work more deeply with the dreams, tarot, and archetypes that make up your psychic landscape. You'll also get free access to our weekly Saturday Salon events. Every Saturday at 11 a.m. Central Time, we get together via Zoom to create shared sacred space for our individual creative practices. You'll also find detailed show notes for each and every full-length episode, and you'll be able to submit dreams and questions for interpretation on our new segment, Dear Dream Diary. There's just so much fun to be had. Memberships start at just $3 a month. That's patreon.com/psychemagic. Hope to see you there.
And I'm curious about your experience of this too, but there's the tie, the connection, the sort of energetic cord with our loved ones that I do believe and have experienced persists beyond when they've transitioned out of this life. And so I am curious because that was such an early moment in this process for you of like, okay, I got to have this dream. I got to see my dad's new spot. And I'm curious how your sort of relationship with him in spirit has evolved, maybe, if that's something that you want to talk about.
Yeah, what a great question. This is one of my favorite topics because I work as a shamanic practitioner. I work a lot with other people's ancestors. So it's very important that I continue to maintain a good relationship with my ancestors, which involves going into a shamanic journey where I essentially go into a trance-like state. I put on a little mindfold or a blindfold. I listen to a drum journeying track, which helps me get into this sort of relaxed state. And then I essentially enter into the spirit world and check in with my ancestors, check in with my animal allies, and ask specific questions that I need clarity on. That's one of my main spiritual practices, you could say. And it's so interesting, this question specifically about my dad, because in the beginning, he was sending us messages like up the wazoo, like over.
Yes.
Like, especially within the electrical system of the house, like the lights would be going wild. Like the lights would either go like really, 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 like we'd be talking about him and the lights would just like shine like extremely light, like, and then dim back down. And like one night, this was kind of funny. This was kind of a ridiculous thing. He was a very early riser. He always woke up at like 5:23 every morning. I run 5 miles. I do 3 sets of 30 push-ups, and then he's like on the train into the city. Like he was a badass. Yeah. But it's only because his alarm clock got stuck on that number, and instead of just buying a new alarm clock, he was like, yep, that will do.
That's right.
That's fine. That'll work. So yeah, he was a long guy. And I remember once, I've always really enjoyed being an early riser. Not always enjoyed, let's put it this way. I've always wanted to be an early riser and sort of struggled at times because I'm really trying to be like Ben Franklin. He woke up at 5 a.m. every morning. And if you look up Ben Franklin's like entire life schedule, he was he ran a tight ship, and that's why he was Ben. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I've been trying to Ben Franklin for years. Recently, I think I'm starting to nail it. Thank goodness. But at this time in my life, I was like, I really want to wake up. Like, I think I said something crazy, like 4:30 in the morning, because we think in sort of spiritual circles, that sort of time between like 3 and 5 a.m. is what they call the ambrosial hours. Which
I didn't know that.
You didn't know about it? It just sounds great, but it is great too. It does. Ambrosial hours is really this time where you could say like the veil between worlds is very thin. So essentially, especially also if you're going through any kind of like spiritual process, sometimes you may tend to wake up at around like 3:30, 4 in the morning.
Oh, I've experienced that for sure. Like for certain periods where I'm just constantly waking up in that like zone.
Yeah. And my perspective is that if you are waking up at that time, it perhaps is an invitation to sit with what's coming up, to maybe go into meditation. If anything, just light a candle and write some things down in a journal, like this kind of a thing. I think it's a really beautiful, opportune time to do our spiritual, sort of do the work that we need to do on ourselves before we begin the day. So I set my alarm for 4:30 in the morning, and as it went off, I hit the snooze button, and just after I hit the snooze button, every smoke alarm in the house starts to go off.
Oh.
So I like rush out of bed and I go and I turn it off and I was like, not today, not today. Like I'm going back to sleep. I go back, I get back into bed, and a moment later, all the smoke alarms again. Like there was no fire. I checked, like we were good. And this happened like multiple nights in a row because every night I was like, today's the day. Like, I'm waking up 4:30, and every morning these smoke alarms would go off. So he was very, very active in the beginning. And that's only like a fraction of the experiences that I had with him.
Right.
He first passed, and sort of my experience of him, and then also when I check in with other people's ancestors, is I think especially soon after the person passes, the spirit tends to stay very, very close to earth, sort of to just like watch over things, check in on people. And also I think in some instances, not all, but to give these sort of signs of reassurance, and honestly, even play pranks. Like this guy, he was a funny guy. I mean, he was always playing pranks, and honestly, like he's playing some pranks on us. So he stayed very close, I would say, in the first year, 2 years, something like this. And then slowly over time, it began to fade, and that's okay. Like I'm okay with it. It's sort of it makes sense. So my experience of him when I do go in, it's kind of funny. Like I don't call him very often on the spirit phone, only when I really, really need him, because he will come. Like he is staying close enough that he is available if I do need him. But I really only call him when I'm like, Dad, I really need some support here, and he'll come through. And then he'll check in. He'll give me sort of whatever insight or support I need in that moment. And he's like, all right, Lena, you're good. Gotta go.
You got this.
And just like, you got this, girl. Like, it's all good. And he'll go off. And I'm like, all right. So I'm also sort of curious. Like, I would like to know in some ways, but it's also not important. Like, I guess I'll catch up with him on the other side when I pass. Like, I'm not like hugely concerned about this, but I am sort of curious. Like, my belief, and this is it's a belief, and I also know that there's so much about the afterlife and the spirit world that I think as humans we're not meant to comprehend and meant to understand, and that's cool too. Like I'm good with that. I don't need to know all the answers. But my idea is that when we cross over, some of the time I believe our soul goes into what we call like soul pods or soul groups, where we learn from other souls, we gain more information, we perhaps digest and dissect certain aspects of our lives, of what we did in our lives, and maybe sometimes we're just resting. Like sometimes I had my great grandmother, she was 106. Like I imagine when she died, she was like, I'm just gonna chill for a while in the
I need a minute.
Like I need a minute, like of pure nothingness.
Just let me like relax.
Yeah, like, and maybe it's that too. And then, so I do still have a very close relationship with him. I think it's kind of interesting. I have this, my personal experience has been this, and I find other people have a similar experience, that oftentimes after a person passes, we tend to have almost even like a better relationship with that person than we had during the time. Which is sort of like a surprising thing.
There's not any like posturing. There's not any bullshit. Like it's just totally authentic and open.
Yeah. Like all of the ways in which, I mean, they are still themselves, but it's sort of like, the word to be absolved is, it's a tough one, but in that way, it's sort of like all of the kind of like edgy bits and kind of like all of the hurts and all of the betrayals and all of the pain aspect.
Yes. The nastier, like, ego stuff
is just gone, but it's not as if they won't acknowledge it. Like if there is certain wounds and trauma that you want to work on with an ancestor, like they will come through to help you with that and acknowledge your experience. Like they're not here to be like gaslighting you as you're going into your experience, but I think all of those sort of edgy spiky bits of people's sort of personalities are just like washed away.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that you describe kind of, different phases of your relationship with your dad in spirit, because I too have experienced that in my closest sort of like ancestor relationship, my grandmother, Julie, who was a fabulous Southern woman with her caftans, like flowing caftans and like big hair. I had to put her face on every day, right? One of those. of course, obviously. But she, I feel like at the beginning was super present, super attuned, giving me lots of signs, like she was right there. But then, yes, over time, over a few years, I do feel like her spirit is maybe just off doing some other work, doing some other things. And she will show up, like you said, if I'm like, girl, please, I need you. Please help me. She's still connected to me, but it's like she's got some other like tasks going on or something. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, they're busy.
Like waiting for
They
you
have
to be like,
things
hi.
to do. They're
Yeah.
not just hanging out. Like,
People always
they're not like
cracks me
watching
up.
you when you're like getting
Yeah,
down.
like they're not just like watching you for fun. Like, yeah. But that's really cool to hear you, because that reflects my own experience, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny. It's such an experience.
Now, okay, you touched on shamanic journeying, but okay, Elena, for me and also the listeners, I feel like I need more about what happens in these sessions. Like, if someone shows up with you and we're doing a shamanic journeying session, what exactly is going on? What are we doing?
It's a good question. And it's one that's somehow, I feel like I answer it differently every time, but there is a common thread because it's something that's so specific and unique to each person.
Makes sense.
Though the common thread, essentially, so I work with people here in my studio on Long Island, and I also do remote sessions because my experience is this energetic work has the ability to literally transcend time and space. Super
Yes, it does.
like we're going into the quantum field, doing a little rearranging of things, and so it has the ability. And of course, my preference would be to have someone here in person, because I do also a lot of hands-on work, if is open to that, but consent.
Like hands-on healing. You talk about yoga nidra as well.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, when somebody comes in, it's funny, 'cause sometimes people really do want to talk. And of course, I'm always here to listen and absorb whatever it is they want to share, although it's not necessary. So someone can sort of give me like a very loose understanding of kind of what they're going through, what they're moving through. If it's either a grief, loss of a loved one, loss of a home, a house, a job, transitioning from one job to another, like any kind of, or even if they're just processing sort of some of us are literally carrying around like an entire lifetime of sort of stuff that they've never really held space for. And when I think about the work I do, it's really so much about witnessing another person in their experience and opening up the channels for them energetically to witness and hold space for themselves, so that they can also leave having tools, feeling it more balanced for sure. But then also I give every single person a personalized integration guide, because essentially what happens is when we go in, after we have our little check-in, when we go in, I call in their whole celestial crew, their ancestors, their guides, their animal allies, like any elementals, like their whole crew. And also if they have a specific, you could say, deity or spirit or any kind of being that they want to work with, I'll call them in. And that's the other thing though too, is that sometimes I just want to say, like, sometimes they'll be like, I really would love my grandmother to come in. And I go in and like, she's like, yeah, I'm here.
So
but like,
amazing.
Actually the person who really needs to work through you is this ancestor or this being, you know what I mean? You really never know. And then other times people like won't have a connect, or they won't even like mention a certain ancestor, and then and that ancestor like bursts through and is like, all right, this is what we're gonna do, and they just like, and sometimes it's mostly the ancestors. So essentially, like, I'm there to be a channel for whatever guiding divine, I'm going to say divine healing energy wants to come through, and so I'm essentially guided to work in a very specific way for each individual person. And what I'm doing is I'm channeling this energy, which can be in the form of actually using my hands to transmit this energy. I use my voice to communicate certain frequencies. That's not necessarily in like a specific language. Sometimes it needs to be said in English, but other times it's what you might like a light language. And sometimes I use certain healing tools like crystals or stones, or it can be extremely specific for someone. Like the other day, I had to give someone some acorns. Like that's what spirit wanted me. So I have like my whole space is just, I have different oils and essential oils and salt and different Florida waters. And so it really can be a whole mix of tools. I also have my medicine drum, my rattle. Sometimes we use there's anything that really needs to be kind of like blasted through, I'll use certain like percussive instruments. Also, these kinds of instruments can help the person go into a journey of their own more deeply. Like while I'm working on that person, it is nice if the person is also kind of working with me or working within themselves and perhaps wearing a mindfold or blindfold to have a third eye journey, or you could say going into like a visionary state. But it's also not necessary. I also tell people like, listen, if you want to lay back and like take a nap, that's okay. The work is still being done. Like if you want to lay back and just be thinking like about your grocery list and what you're going to eat for dinner, like that's okay too. Like the work is still being done. Like ideally you're being present with your experience, because also the entire time I'm tuning into that person. I'm listening to their breath. I'm noticing how each breath as I'm working is shifting the energy within their bodies. And so it's not only their physical body, but also their energetic body and their spiritual body, you could say. So it's working on all of those levels and balancing, sort of clearing out anything that is ready to be cleared out, bringing in anything that needs to be brought in. Sort of like if I clear something, like we've got to put something sort of else in its place. So we blast it with love or whatever that person needs specifically.
I am sitting with that reminder that if I'm clearing something out, then I also need to be inviting like goodness and love and healing in, right? Like that's a 2-part process.
100%. I mean, it's literally like how I see it when I'm working with people. It's like a puzzle piece almost, or like taking out a thorn or something in somebody's, like some of these things can be quite like intrusive. And so when you take it out, there's like you would say like there's a gaping wound, but like there's a void there that needs to be held up and sort of healed over and yeah, literally like sutured almost, like, okay, let's blast it in. So the last thing I was going to mention also is that occasionally when a person experiences a profound traumatic event, prolonged trauma, this kind of a thing, a person may go through what's called soul loss. If you look up the work of Sandra Ingerman, who's one of the most wonderful shamanic practitioner teachers out there. She has an entire book, Soul Retrieval, my friends, is her book. She has her own podcast. She's literally like the OG amazing woman. And so what we do is it's called a soul retrieval, where essentially I go into kind of a deeper journey into the spirit world to have a conversation with that specific soul part of that person that essentially like, you're going to say shattered or left that person during this traumatic experience. And then it goes into, a lot of my work is really about negotiation. So I negotiate that with that soul part. And I say like, okay, what sort of agreement does so-and-so now need to make with you so that you feel safe to come back in? Then we work it out, energetically. Wow. And then when that part's ready to come back in, I essentially blow that soul part with my, the wind of my into that person's body in whatever specific sort of place in their body that it needs to go. So yes, it's sort of like an overview of what I do, but there's so many places and so many areas that it touches. So
it's incredible. Okay, the thing that I will say for sure is that soul retrieval process that you just described reminds me so much of experiences that I've had with clients in therapy when we're doing parts work, trauma work, IFS. And there will be a part that we call an exile, right? Like a part that has been split off from my core self due to an overwhelming traumatic experience. And then back into integration, the work is, again, reestablishing safety, coaxing that part as a process, right? And so to hear you talk about the energy, like that's like a emotional and experiential process, but you're talking about reflected in those terms, even about the sort of like energetic and spiritual process of that. And so it's just incredible to hear that.
Doing shamanic work is, I think, a part, from my perspective, is it's a part of any sort of self-care regimen. So it's like do this sort of energetic work and you go to therapy and you get a massage and you do your exercise and you eat well, like, and you meditate.
We're looking at these different layers of ourselves and our being.
Yeah, it's big. It's deep work. And that's the thing too. It's something that I love holding space for people in this way, and also to give them tools afterwards to integrate so that they can learn as well how to become their own healer.
Yes.
Because ideally it's something that I can work with people over a long period of time, whether it's once a month or once every 3 months or something like this. But that it also means that in the meantime, in between sessions, like they're doing their own sort of like spiritual, energetic hygiene and taking care of themselves as well.
You did recently specifically about sort of energetic protection within like a hospital setting specifically. Yeah.
I'm so glad you bring this up because, like, I'd like to make more videos like this because to me, I don't want this to sound pompous, but like to me, it's sort of second nature just because like I've had to learn these tools out of necessity. But then I realized like, oh, people don't know about this. So like maybe I should share because it's helpful. So specifically,
It's so helpful.
yeah, like when we're going into spaces that are like literally like emotionally charged spaces.
Yes.
Like a hospital where it's like I say, it's like an airport for souls. So it's like an international airport, we got arrivals and departures all hours of the
Got
day.
a lot going on.
All that going on, and also just energetically with all the machines, like the EMFs, all of this, even if you're not like quote unquote sensitive to these types of things, like it's still, there's a lot of frequency that's going through you. So it's important to protect yourself. And even if you're like, this is a ton of crap, there's a ton of bullshit, like see how you feel if you do a very, very simple things like wear a hat, cover the back of your neck. Like for me, a tendency, you could even look through TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. They say a lot of times like coldness or certain things can enter through the back of the neck. So like from a spiritual perspective, oftentimes things enter or attach at the back of the neck. Cover the back of your neck. Also, it's cold in hospitals, so practicality wise, cover your neck. So it can be also very helpful, but then also just covering yourself in a bit of cologne or Florida water, any kind of thing to sort of just protect your energy. And so those are just very simple ones. But then also afterwards, when you come out, like you may notice yourself feeling super drained. So you want to first go and take a bath in some salt water or get in the shower, like scrub yourself down with Himalayan salt. And then if you can, like get out into nature, get out beneath the trees and take off your shoes, get your toes into some soil and just ground back in and sort of let all of the energy, like the emotion, quite literally, like you can stomp your feet into the earth and just like blast it out. Because if you're not careful, and especially if you're spending a lot of time in the hospital with a loved one or even if you're just getting out of the hospital, like it takes time to sort of release all of that energy. And like my heart goes out to our healthcare workers, like the people who are in that every single day. So yeah. This is just simple little shaman tools, like shaman tips, shamanic, practitioner tips.
Little shaman tips.
Well, you don't have to be totally woo-woo off the deep end to use these tools in your everyday life and be like, oh, actually, it feels really good to keep a little bit of Palo Santo or sage in my car so that after I exit like some really intense social situation where I've had to meet a lot of people and I'm really kind of feeling out of my body and like scattered, that, oh, it feels really good that I can just burn a little bit of sage or Palo Santo and like take a couple moments to breathe and like come back into my body. But you don't have to be, how do I say? It's like these are friendly, these are easy things that you can bring into your life. That my experience is that it can create a really profound shift in just how we're able to navigate being human on Earth, which can be like messy and emotional and like pretty weird sometimes, but also a lot of fun.
And that, like we were saying, that we're all connected, right?
Yes. I think that's such a huge point that you just made. It's like, don't get too wild with it. Don't start overthinking it. Just keep it super duper simple, guys. And nature 100% like is the ultimate healer when it comes down to it. outside, like get yourself into a body of water, put your feet on the ground, like drink good water, sit in front of a fire, stare into the flames, my friend, like go touch a leaf, talk to a leaf or a tree trunk for a while, like lay your body over a boulder. It's so simple, and it doesn't have to be I don't want to say rocket science, but I almost want to say you don't have to be a quantum physicist to understand it's a good thing to take care of yourself energetically so that you can show up in a more kind of like integrated, open-hearted, feet on the ground, chest open, like human being, so we can show up like with integrity again, like so we can build a community of people where number one, we're showing up for ourselves so that we can ask ourselves, how can I show up for my community today?
You said hygiene. It's just little practices, and they don't have to be a big deal, right? Not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Cleanse your aura a little bit. To have energetic boundaries as well.
Not a big deal. Just take care. You brush your teeth every day. Cleanse your aura a little bit every day.
Okay, time is flying away. I'm really curious about just like upcoming things that you are excited about, that events that you have going on. I know you've been doing like some sound healing stuff. So like, is there anything else about your work and your practices that you want to tell us about now that you're excited about?
I have a new offering of this container that's opening up in October, where it's a 3-month container for people who are wanting to dive in super deep into this work within the shamanic healing world, shamanic energy healing world. And it's called Soul Rebirth, Guided Transformation and Empowerment Journey. So it's a super juicy offering because essentially people were coming to see me every single month or every couple, 2 or 3 weeks. And I wanted to offer sort of like a journey for someone who's going through a profound life shift so that we can create a framework around, working through whatever it is that they're working to heal. And so every person gets a session every month. There's PDFs that they'll receive, personalized meditations, yoga classes, and then of course every month they get their personalized integration. So it's a super juicy offering that is opening up in October, enrollment for that, which I'm really pumped about. And then monthly I am doing these sound healing sessions where it's essentially like a bunch of us getting together and doing this work on a massive scale. So my partner and I host them at this community garden here on Long Island. It's called the Growing Love Community Garden. And the next one, I believe, is September 29th. But just check out my Instagram at Elena Box and you'll get all of sort of live events. I have a potential retreat coming up. So another part of my work is called the Griefcation. When you go through profound loss or change, any of these types of things where you are actively grieving, my belief is that it can be so beneficial to take time away, to be with community, to be witnessed in your grief, and to gain tools to understand how to move through it literally in your body and in really in your experience. So these griefcation either weekend or week-long events where every day you're having multiple yoga classes, workshops. You'd be fed beautiful meals every day. You're getting time to be out in nature, so led sort of like nature walks, sound baths. And so yes, we have one. It hasn't been announced yet, but it is coming up. And so ideally these will be happening basically quarterly. So everyone who's wanting to experience it will be able to come out. So this one will be most likely in upstate New York, but just take a look. You can sign up for my newsletter and you'll get all of the information for upcoming griefcations, which is really just a place like we're not going to be sitting around crying together all the time, but like we can, that's the opportunity is there to have the full experience of your grief, because I think one of the most terrifying things that happens to us as humans when we are grieving is the lack of being listened to and the lack of being witnessed. So really it's an invitation to be seen in your grief, to be celebrated in your joy, and all of the places in between, and to navigate these places within your body where you can start to feel like safe. And good is a hard thing to say, but like how to sort of move the grief through your body. So that's coming up. And you can work with me, book a session online. We can do a remote session if you're not on Long Island or in New York, or come and visit me in my studio. It's very cozy here. I have a little medicine dog, a little Shiba Inu who comes in sometimes. She does what I call pause on healing. So she'll come over and give her own version of Reiki. And you can check out my podcast, the Ode to Joy podcast. We sort of took a little summer hiatus, but we're sort of in the beginning of season 2. This season, we're talking about the muse, where basically I'm curious to talk to people about like how they've embraced their life, you can say mission, their muse, like their internal genius, and what obstacles they've gone through. Because I'm always curious about like other people's processes, like how did you become who you became, and like what grief or what huge thing happened in your life that informs who you've become and what you do. So Ode to Joy podcast, and then check out my book, Grieve Outside the Box.
Elena, you are just a delight. Thank you again for making time to share yourself and your beautiful work with us. I know listeners will be excited to engage with you and keep up with you, and I look forward to keeping in touch. This was just so fun.
Thank you, dear listener, for listening to my journey. It's been my sincere pleasure to share it with you. So thank you, and thank you, Jordan, for having me.
That's a wrap for this episode. If you haven't already, please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast app of choice. It really makes a difference and helps other people find the show. Thank you again to my guest, Elena Box. I had the best time talking about all of the deepest, darkest, most wondrous aspects of our world, and I cannot thank you enough for sharing so graciously all of your beautiful experiences with life, death, and everything in between. We'll see you back here next month with another amazing guest. And in the meantime, we hope you'll join us in the next Saturday Salon, a weekly hour of sacred space to spend on your creative projects, hosted by Jordan via Zoom. Sign up via the events page on our website, psychemagicpodcast.com. If you believe in this work and want to support the continuation of our show, please join us on Patreon. There, we are building a community where you'll find bonus dream work exercises, guided meditations, fun minisodes, and so much more. That's patreon.com/psychemagic. All links are included in show notes. We hope you'll also follow along with our shenanigans on Instagram and TikTok at Psyche Magic Podcast. Psyche Magic was produced and recorded by me, Jordan Hale. Editing for this episode is by Masuzu Inaga. Our theme music is by Young Summer. Artwork is by Annika Murphy. Special thanks go to Daniel Higby, Grace Fuse, and Michael McMillan. Thank you so much for listening. I'll leave you with a question. If you must sleep through a third of your life, are you willing to sleep through your dreams too? Get your dream journals out, y'all. Until next time.